A warp portal tears open on a dying forge world, and through the screaming chaos emerges something the daemons of the Imperium have never encountered before. It's the Doomslayer, a warrior who has spent eons doing nothing but killing their kind, and he's brought Hell's most devastating weapons with him. The Adeptus Mechanicus watches in horror and awe as this silent berserker rips through greater daemons with his bare hands, ignoring every law of the Imperium while somehow being completely incorruptible by chaos itself. But when the High Lords of Terra discover what he truly is and the universe he came from, will they embrace him as humanity's ultimate weapon against the ruinous powers? Or will the Inquisition declare him the greatest heresy the galaxy has ever seen? The forge world of Metallicus Prime had been burning for 3 days straight. Black smoke rose from broken factories that once made weapons for the Emperor's armies. The sky itself had torn open, a massive wound in reality that bled crimson light across the scorched ground. Through that wound, daemons poured like water from a broken dam. They were creatures of Khorne, the blood god, monsters made of rage and murder. Bloodletters they were called, standing twice as tall as a man with skin the color of fresh blood and horns that curved like wicked blades. They carried swords that burned with unholy fire, and their eyes held nothing but the desire to kill. Iron Father Kratos stood at the front line, his powered armor dented and scorched from endless fighting. He was a Space Marine of the Iron Hands chapter, and half his body was metal now, replaced piece by piece over decades of war. His left arm was a massive power fist that could crush stone, and his right eye glowed red behind his helmet's lens. Behind him stood 20 of his brothers, each one a giant in black armor, each one worth 100 normal soldiers. But they were dying. One by one, the bloodletters cut them down. For every daemon they killed, 3 more came through the portal. Beside the Space Marines fought the servants of the machine god, the Adeptus Mechanicus. They were priests who worshipped technology like others worshipped the Emperor. Their bodies were more machine than flesh now, covered in metal plates and glowing sensors. They carried strange weapons that shot lightning and fire, but even their blessed technology was failing. Tech Priest Zalen raised his plasma cannon and fired, turning 2 bloodletters into ash, but the weapon overheated in his hands, burning through its cooling systems. He fell back, his mechanical lungs wheezing as the heat washed over him. The ground shook with every step the daemons took. Their brass armor clanked and scraped, making sounds like screaming metal. They chanted in a language that hurt to hear, words that made blood drip from human ears and eyes water with pain. A bloodletter reached the Imperial lines and swung its burning sword at a Space Marine. The blade cut through ceramite armor like it was paper, and the Marine fell, his chest carved open. Another daemon jumped on top of him, raising its sword for the killing blow. That was when the second portal opened. This one was different from the first. It was smaller, burning with green energy instead of red. It made a sound like reality itself was tearing, a shriek that cut through even the daemons chanting. Everyone stopped fighting for just a moment, turning to look at this new wound in space. From the green light, something shot out like a bullet from a gun. It hit the ground hard, cracking the stone beneath it, sending up a cloud of dust and debris. The dust settled slowly. Through the gray cloud, a shape stood up. It was humanoid, but shorter than a Space Marine, maybe 7 feet tall. It wore armor that was green and bronze, covered in scratches and scorch marks that told the story of countless battles. The armor had no purity seals, no Imperial eagles, no markings of any chapter or regiment. On the chest piece was a symbol no one recognized, a strange mark that looked like ancient runes. The helmet was smooth and featureless except for a thin visor that glowed with sickly green light. The figure turned its head, looking at the battlefield. It moved with purpose, like a hunting animal that had just caught a scent. A bloodletter charged at it, sword raised high, roaring a challenge to this new target. The figure did not run or raise a weapon. It simply waited, perfectly still. When the daemon's sword came down, the figure moved faster than anyone could track. One moment it was standing there, the next it was inside the daemon's guard. Its fist went straight through the bloodletter's chest, punching clean through brass armor and daemonic flesh. The daemon opened its mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The figure pulled its arm back, and the daemon exploded into ash and smoke, banished back to the warp. Iron Father Kratos felt his jaw drop inside his helmet. He had never seen anything move that fast or hit that hard. Not even his Primarch, Ferrus Manus, had torn through daemons with such ease. The figure looked down at its gauntlet, covered in daemon blood that steamed and hissed against the armor. Then it reached behind its back and pulled out a weapon. It was a shotgun, but unlike any shotgun Kratos had ever seen. It was massive, almost as long as a bolter, with 2 barrels that glowed with internal heat. Strange symbols were carved into its metal surface, symbols that hurt to look at directly. 3 bloodletters charged at once, coming from different angles to surround the warrior. The figure spun, bringing the shotgun up in one smooth motion. It fired twice, and the sound was like thunder breaking inside a metal box. The first shot hit a bloodletter square in the face, and its entire head simply ceased to exist, blown into red mist. The second shot caught another daemon in the chest, the force so strong it lifted the creature off its feet and threw it back 20 feet. The figure then dropped the shotgun, letting it hang from a strap, and grabbed the third bloodletter by the throat with one hand. It squeezed, and the daemon's neck crunched like breaking glass. The warrior then grabbed the daemon's horn and twisted sharply. The entire body came apart, ripped in half from head to waist. The pieces fell to the ground and dissolved into smoke. The battlefield went silent. Every daemon stopped moving, turning to face this new threat. Every space marine and tech priest stared in disbelief. The figure stood in the middle of a circle of daemon corpses, its armor splattered with blood that burned away as quickly as it landed. Then it started walking forward, toward the mass of daemons that stood between it and the warp portal. It did not run or charge. It just walked, steady and unstoppable, like a glacier moving down a mountain. The daemons rushed forward as one, a wave of red bodies and burning swords. The figure met them head-on. It pulled out another weapon, this one a rifle that crackled with blue energy. It fired in short bursts, each shot turning a daemon to ash. When they got close, it used its fists, each punch strong enough to shatter daemon armor and break bones that were not really bones. It grabbed a bloodletter's sword arm, ripped the entire arm off, then used the daemon's own sword to cut down 3 others. When the sword broke, it threw the pieces like spears, each one finding a daemon's heart. Iron Father Kratos shook himself out of his shock. This was no daemon, he realized. Daemons did not fight other daemons like this. This was something else, something that killed with purpose and skill, not mindless rage. He activated his Voxcaster, speaking to his remaining brothers. Iron Hands, advance, support the unknown warrior, for the Emperor and the Omnissiah. His voice boomed across the battlefield, breaking the spell that had frozen his men. The Space Marines roared their battle cries and charged forward, their bolters firing, their chainswords revving. The battle became a storm of violence. The unknown warrior fought like nothing Kratos had ever witnessed. It moved between fighting styles without pause, switching from ranged combat to close quarters in the span of a heartbeat. When it ran out of ammunition, it picked up daemon weapons and used them until they broke, then threw the pieces and used its bare hands. A bloodletter swung at its head, and it ducked under the blade, came up inside the daemon's reach, and drove both fists into the creature's chest so hard that the daemon folded in half backward, its spine snapping. Tech Priest Zalen stumbled closer, his sensors working overtime to analyze this impossible warrior. His augmented eyes recorded every movement, every weapon discharge, every kill. The data made no sense. The warrior's armor was not Imperial design, not Eldar, not Tau, not any known Xenos technology. The weapons used ammunition types that did not exist in any database. The fighting style was brutal and efficient, wasting no motion, no energy. Everything was focused on one goal: kill the enemy as fast as possible. There was no honor in it, no ritual, no glory. Just death delivered with absolute certainty. The warrior reached the warp portal, standing before the Tyrian reality that still vomited daemons into the world. More bloodletters poured through, but they hesitated now, seeing the mountain of their dead brothers surrounding this single figure. The warrior looked up at the portal, tilted its head as if studying it, then reached to its belt and pulled out a small device. It pressed a button, and the device beeped 3 times. The warrior threw it into the portal, then turned and ran. Not walked, ran, faster than any human should be able to move. It covered 50 feet in seconds, diving behind a broken wall just as the device exploded. The blast was enormous, a ball of fire and force that shook the entire battlefield. The warp portal shrieked, wavering like disturbed water, then collapsed in on itself with a sound like breaking glass. The remaining daemons on the battlefield screamed as their connection to the warp was severed, and they began dissolving, their forms unable to hold shape in real space without the portal's power. In moments, It was over. The forge world fell silent except for the crackling of fires and the groaning of wounded men. Iron Father Kratos stood among the bodies of friend and foe alike, breathing hard inside his helmet. He turned to where the warrior had taken cover and saw it standing up, brushing dust off its armor like this was just another day. The warrior's helmet turned, scanning the battlefield, counting the dead perhaps, or looking for more enemies. Finding none, it started walking toward the Space Marines. Kratos raised his power fist, not in threat but in caution. His brothers formed up behind him, bolters ready but not aimed. The warrior stopped 10 feet away, and for a long moment, nobody moved. Then Kratos took a step forward, removing his helmet to show his face, half flesh and half metal. I am Iron Father Kratos of the Iron Hands chapter. In the name of the Emperor of Mankind, identify yourself. His voice was calm but firm, demanding an answer. The warrior did not respond. It simply stood there, silent as a statue. Kratos tried again. You fight well, stranger, and you have saved many lives this day. But I must know what you are and where you came from. Still nothing. The warrior's helmet gave no indication if it even understood the words. After another moment of silence, it reached up and tapped the side of its helmet, pointing to where a human's ears would be, then shook its head slowly. The meaning was clear. It could not speak, or would not speak. Kratos felt a chill run down his spine. In all his centuries of war, he had never met anything quite like this. The warrior turned away, looking at the sky as if searching for something, and Kratos knew with absolute certainty that whatever this being was, it had just changed everything. The battle barge Iron Will hung in the void like a cathedral of war, its hull stretching nearly 4 miles from prow to stern. Inside its armored corridors, dim red lights cast shadows on walls covered in prayers to the machine god. Iron Father Kratos walked those corridors now, his heavy boots clanking against metal floors with each step. Behind him came 4 of his brothers, their bolters held ready, and between them walked the silent warrior in green armor. They had bound its wrists with power suppression chains, thick bands of blessed metal that could hold even a corrupted space marine. The warrior had not resisted when they applied the chains. It had simply stood there, letting them work, its featureless helmet watching everything with that eerie green glow. The doors to the council chamber slid open with a hiss of hydraulics. The room beyond was circular, with walls lined with cogitators and data screens that flickered with endless streams of information. In the center stood a round table made of polished black stone, and around that table sat the emergency conclave. There were 3 more Iron Hands captains, their armor bearing the scars of countless campaigns. There were tech priests in red robes, their faces hidden behind metal masks and sensor arrays. And there, at the head of the table, sat Inquisitor Mordecai of the Ordo Malleus, and his presence made even the Space Marines uncomfortable. He was tall for a human man, nearly 6.5 feet, with pale skin and hair so black it seemed to drink in the light. His left eye was normal, bright green and sharp, but his right eye had been replaced with a bionic implant that glowed with soft blue light and rotated constantly, analyzing everything it saw. He wore armor painted in the black and red of the Inquisition, and at his belt hung a force sword that hummed with psychic energy. On his shoulder sat a servo skull, a human skull with mechanical parts grafted to it, its empty eye sockets burning with red light as it recorded everything for his archives. When he spoke, his voice was cold and precise, like a judge reading a death sentence. "Bring the prisoner forward," he commanded. Kratos and his brothers pushed the warrior toward the table. It walked without stumbling, its movements controlled and purposeful even in chains. When it reached the table, it stopped and stood perfectly still, waiting. Mordecai leaned forward, studying it with both his organic and bionic eyes. "I am Inquisitor Mordecai, sanctioned by the God Emperor himself to root out heresy wherever it hides. You stand accused of being a possible agent of chaos, of wielding forbidden Xenos technology, and of murdering the Emperor's servants without authorization." He paused, waiting for a response. The warrior said nothing. Its helmet turned slightly, looking at each person around the table in turn, but it made no sound. One of the tech priests leaned forward, his mechanical voice buzzing with static. "The prisoner's armor shows no sign of chaos corruption. Scans reveal no warp taint, no demonic possession, no mutations. However, the technology is completely unknown. The power source alone defies all known principles of Imperial engineering. It is Xenos in origin, certainly, but from what species we cannot determine. Another tech priest added his analysis. The weapons confiscated from the prisoner are equally mysterious. The shotgun uses a form of plasma acceleration we have never seen. The rifle fires concentrated energy packets that should not be possible with its size and power consumption. And there is this. He held up a long blade, roughly 3 feet in length, that glowed with red energy along its edge. This blade cuts through blessed ceramite like it is not even there. It generates a field that disrupts molecular bonds on contact. In theory, it could cut through anything. Inquisitor Mordecai held up his hand for silence. Enough. The technology is damning. But what concerns me more is what we witnessed on Metallicus Prime. This being killed greater daemons with its bare hands. It showed no fear, no hesitation, no weakness. Such strength without corruption is impossible. Everything the warp touches, it corrupts. Everything. He stood up, walking around the table toward the prisoner. I have spent 40 years hunting daemons and daemon worshippers. I have seen space marines fall to corruption. I have seen saints turn into monsters. But you walk through hell itself and come out clean. Why? What are you? He stopped directly in front of the warrior, looking up at its helmet. Speak. Defend yourself, or I will have no choice but to declare you too dangerous to live and order your execution. The warrior did not respond. It did not move. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the humming of machinery and the clicking of the tech priest's implants. Then Iron Father Kratos stepped forward, his voice respectful but firm. Inquisitor, with respect, I do not believe this being is our enemy. I watched it fight. It targeted only the daemons, only the creatures of chaos. When it could have killed my wounded brothers, it ignored them and pursued the enemy. When it sealed the warp portal, it saved thousands of lives. These are not the actions of a daemon or a traitor. Mordecai turned to face him, his bionic eye whirring as it focused. And yet it refuses to speak, refuses to identify itself, refuses to explain its presence. In my experience, those who have nothing to hide do not act this way. I have seen cultists who claimed to fight chaos while secretly serving it. I have seen possessed warriors who did not even know they were damned. Without understanding what this thing is, I cannot take the risk of letting it live. He reached for his force sword, his fingers wrapping around the hilt. The blade began to glow brighter, responding to his psychic will. I am sorry, Iron Father, but my duty is clear. For the safety of the Imperium, this unknown must be destroyed. Before anyone could react, alarms screamed throughout the ship. The red lights in the chamber switched to purple, the color of warp breach warnings. A tech priest rushed to the nearest cogitator terminal, his metal fingers flying across the keys. Inquisitor, we have multiple warp signatures forming inside the ship. Level 7, sections 12 through 18. Something is coming through. Mordecai's face went pale. That is impossible. We are in real space, light years from any warp storms. How can anything manifest here? The tech priest's voice rose in pitch, his artificial calm cracking. I do not know, but the readings are clear. We have at least 30 contacts, possibly more, and they are moving fast. The floor beneath their feet began to shake. Somewhere in the distance, bolter fire erupted, the distinctive boom 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 of space marines engaging an enemy. Screams echoed through the vox channels, men crying out in fear and pain. Then the doors to the council chamber exploded inward, blown apart by multicolored fire. Through the smoke came things that should not exist, daemons with pink skin and twisted faces that wore expressions of cruel amusement. Pink horrors, lesser daemons of Tsanch, the changer of ways. They capered and danced as they entered, their bodies constantly shifting form, growing extra limbs that vanished a moment later, faces appearing on their stomachs only to melt away. They threw balls of warp fire from their hands, and where the fire touched, metal corroded and flesh burned with impossible colors. The iron hands opened fire immediately, their bolters roaring in the confined space. Mass reactive rounds tore into the daemons, exploding inside their unnatural flesh. One pink horror split in half, but instead of dying, it became 2 blue horrors, smaller versions that laughed with high-pitched voices and attacked twice as fast. The tech priests activated their defensive weapons, lightning arcing from their fingertips and burning the daemons, but more kept coming. A flamer daemon floated through the doorway, its body made of living fire, and it breathed a gout of flame that turned a tech priest into a screaming torch. In the chaos, the warrior in green armor moved, Its arms snapped apart the power suppression chains like they were made of paper, the blessed metal shattering into pieces that clattered on the floor. Before anyone could stop it, the warrior pulled free the weapons that had been confiscated from it, tearing them from the hands of the startled tech priests who held them. The shotgun came up, and it fired twice in rapid succession. The first shot vaporized a pink horror's head. The second caught 3 blue horrors and scattered them like leaves in a storm. The warrior then charged forward, running straight at the mass of daemons with no regard for its own safety. Iron Father Kratos shouted orders to his brothers, directing their fire to support the warrior, but his mind was reeling. How had the chains broken? Those chains could hold a dreadnought, and this being had snapped them with ease. He watched as the warrior reached the daemon horde and began killing with a speed and brutality that made the battle on Metallicus Prime look slow by comparison. It grabbed a flamer daemon by what passed for its neck and slammed it into the wall so hard that the metal buckled. It stomped on a blue horror, crushing it flat, then kicked the remains into 2 more daemons, bowling them over. Every movement had purpose. Every action led to a kill, and the warrior never stopped moving, never gave the daemons a chance to surround it. Inquisitor Mordecai drew his force sword and joined the battle, his blade cutting through daemon flesh with bursts of psychic lightning. But even as he fought, his mind worked, analyzing what he was seeing. The warrior showed no signs of warp corruption, even while touching daemons directly. It fought with perfect clarity, no rage, no fear, just cold efficiency. And most importantly, the daemons seemed to recognize it. When they looked at the warrior, he could see something in their eyes that he had never seen in a daemon before. Uncertainty, maybe even fear. He cut down a pink horror and moved closer to the warrior, fighting back to back with it now. "Who are you?" he shouted over the sounds of battle. "What are you?" The warrior glanced at him for just a moment, its helmet's green glow seeming to focus on his face, then it turned back to the fight without answering. The battle raged through the corridor beyond the council chamber. More daemons poured in from deeper in the ship, drawn by the sounds of fighting and the scent of fear. A lord of change, a greater daemon of change, manifested at the far end of the corridor, its massive form barely fitting in the space. It had the body of a giant bird with wings that spanned 20 feet, covered in feathers that constantly changed color. Its face was part bird, part human, twisted into an expression of mocking intelligence. It carried a staff that crackled with warp lightning, and when it spoke, its voice was 1,000 voices talking at once, all slightly out of sync. "Foolish mortals, you cannot stop the will of Tzeentch. Your ship is ours, your souls are ours, your very reality is ours to reshape." The iron hands concentrated their fire on the greater daemon, but their bolter rounds seemed to pass through its shifting form without causing real damage. The Lord of Change laughed and raised its staff, preparing to unleash a blast of energy that would kill everyone in the corridor. But before it could attack, the warrior in green armor did something unexpected. It pulled a weapon from its back that no one had seen before, a massive gun that looked like it had been built from spare parts and madness. The barrel was as thick as a man's torso, and inside it, green energy began to build, glowing brighter and brighter until it hurt to look at. The warrior aimed at the greater daemon and pulled the trigger. The blast that erupted from the weapon was like a small star being born and dying in an instant. Green energy screamed down the corridor, a beam so bright it burned afterimages into everyone's eyes. It hit the Lord of Change dead center, and the greater daemon's mocking expression turned to shock, then pain, then nothing as its entire body was consumed by the energy. The daemon did not dissolve or fade back to the warp. It simply ceased to exist, erased from reality as if it had never been there. The blast continued past where the daemon had stood, punching through 3 bulkheads before finally dissipating. When the light faded, the corridor was silent except for the ringing in everyone's ears. Inquisitor Mordecai stood frozen, his sword still raised, staring at the spot where the greater daemon had been. In 40 years of service, he had never seen anything kill a greater daemon that completely. Banishment was possible, sending them back to the warp for a time, but this was different. That daemon was gone, truly gone, destroyed at a level that should not be possible. He looked at the warrior, who was already moving forward, checking the corridor for more threats, and he made a decision. He lowered his sword and spoke into his vox bead. "All units, cease hostile actions against the unknown warrior. That is a direct order from inquisitorial authority. The prisoner is now under my personal sanction." Iron Father Kratos joined him, his armor dented and scorched but intact. "You have changed your mind about execution, Inquisitor." Mordecai nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the warrior's back. "I need to understand what this being is. And there is only one way to do that." He stepped forward, following the warrior as it cleared the rest of the corridor. The remaining lesser daemons fled at its approach, diving back into warp rifts that closed behind them. When the last daemon was gone and the ship's alarms finally fell silent, the warrior stopped and stood still, waiting. Mordecai approached it carefully, holstering his sword. "I am a sanctioned psyker," he said quietly. "With your permission, I would like to look into your mind, to see the truth of what you are. I promise I will not harm you or invade your privacy more than necessary. But I must know if you are safe to be around." The warrior turned to face him fully. For a long moment, it did nothing, and Mordecai thought it might refuse. Then, slowly, it reached up and placed one armored hand over its chest, over where a human heart would be, and nodded once. Mordecai felt his own heart beat faster. This was dangerous, touching an unknown mind, but he had to know. He raised his hand, placing his fingertips against the side of the warrior's helmet, and opened his psychic senses. Immediately, he gasped. The warrior's mind was not like human minds, not even like transhuman minds of the Space Marines. It was focused, compressed, like a diamond formed under impossible pressure. There was no room for doubt or fear or corruption. There was only purpose, absolute and unbreakable. He pushed deeper, searching for memories, for context, for understanding. What he saw made him cry out. He saw worlds burning, but not the worlds of the Imperium. He saw daemons, endless armies of them, but they looked wrong, slightly different from the daemons he knew. He saw this warrior fighting alone through halls of brass and fire, through dimensions of pure torment, killing not for glory or duty, but because it was what it was made to do. He saw hell itself, not the warp, but something older, something primal. And he saw this warrior carved from that hell's fury to be its ultimate destroyer. He saw betrayal and loss and rage so pure it could burn galaxies, compressed down into a single purpose: rip and tear until it is done. The images came faster, overwhelming him, showing him battles that lasted centuries, weapons that reality should not allow, a crusade of one against infinite evil. And through it all, one constant truth: this warrior could not be corrupted because corruption had already tried and failed. Hell itself had tested it and found it wanting to serve anyone but the innocent. Mordecai pulled his hand back, stumbling backward. Kratos caught him before he fell, his concern clear even through his helmet. "Inquisitor, what did you see?" Mordecai took several deep breaths, steadying himself. His organic eye was wide with shock, and a single tear ran down his cheek. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. I saw the Emperor's will made flesh in another universe. I saw what happens when you take a man and make him into a weapon so perfect that even the gods fear him. I saw." He looked up at the warrior, who stood patiently waiting. "There is no corruption in that mind. No darkness except what it uses to fight darkness. No weakness except compassion for the innocent. This being is not our enemy. It is something far more valuable." He straightened, his usual composure returning. "It is a weapon we can use." Iron Father Kratos felt relief wash through him, but also concern. "What do you propose, Inquisitor?" Mordecai walked around the warrior, studying it with new eyes. "This being has proven it can kill greater daemons more effectively than anything we possess. It has shown it cannot be corrupted. And it has demonstrated a willingness to fight alongside us against chaos. I propose we test it further. There is a mission, one that I was planning to undertake myself, but expected to die attempting. A suicide mission into the Eye of Terror to retrieve lost technology. If this warrior can survive that and return, then we will know for certain that it is what I believe it to be. The Emperor's answer to our prayers, sent from another reality to help us in our darkest hour." He turned to address the warrior directly. "I offer you a choice. Come with us into the heart of chaos itself, and help us retrieve something that could save millions of lives. Or refuse, and I will have you escorted to the nearest Imperial world where you can go your own way. What say you?" The warrior stood silent for a moment, its helmet turning to look at the damage in the corridor, at the scorch marks where daemons had burned, at the bodies of tech priests who had not survived the attack. Then it looked back at Mordecai and gave a single sharp nod. Kratos allowed himself a small smile behind his helmet. "Then it is decided. We set course for the Eye of Terror immediately. May the Emperor protect us all, for we are going to need it." The warrior turned and began walking back toward the council chamber, its movements purposeful and unhurried. As it passed, each space marine and surviving tech priest stepped aside, watching it with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Mordecai watched it go and whispered a prayer to the Emperor, asking for guidance. He had just made a decision that could save the Imperium or doom it. Only time would tell which. The Thunderhawk gunship descended through clouds that were not made of water, but of screaming souls. The sky above the Daemon world was a bruise, purple and black and sickly green, colors that shifted and changed with every heartbeat. Below stretched a landscape that made no sense, hills that bent upward in impossible curves, rivers that flowed uphill, forests where the trees were made of bone and rotting flesh. This was a world inside the Eye of Terror, a place where the warp and reality mixed together like oil and water that refused to separate. Here, the laws of physics were suggestions that chaos could ignore whenever it wanted. Inside the Thunderhawk, Iron Father Kratos checked his weapons for the 10th time. His power fist hummed with energy, ready to crush whatever enemy appeared. Beside him sat 5 of his best warriors, veterans who had fought daemons for decades and lived to tell about it. Their black armor was covered in purity seals and oath papers, prayers written in high Gothic that promised they would never fall to corruption. Across from them sat 3 tech priests, their mechanical bodies reinforced with extra armor plating and blessed oils. And at the front of the passenger bay, standing perfectly still despite the turbulence, was the warrior in green armor. It had not moved since they entered the Eye of Terror 3 hours ago, had not spoken, had not shown any sign of fear or discomfort. It simply waited, patient as stone. Inquisitor Mordecai sat next to the warrior, his force sword across his lap, his bionic eye constantly scanning and recording data. He had not slept since they entered this cursed space. How could he? Every moment here was a test of faith, a battle against the whispers that tried to crawl into his mind and make him doubt everything he believed. He could hear them now, soft voices promising power, promising knowledge, promising an end to pain if he would just listen, just open his mind a little more. He recited the litany of protection under his breath, the words forming a shield around his thoughts. The Emperor protects. The Emperor knows all. The Emperor guides my hand and my mind. I am his servant, his weapon, his will made manifest. The whispers faded, pushed back by faith, but they never disappeared completely. The Thunderhawk's pilot spoke over the Vox, his voice tight with stress. Inquisitor, we are approaching the landing zone. Emperor preserve us. The fortress is worse than the reports indicated. I am reading massive warp signatures, thousands of lesser daemons, and something big at the center. Very big. Mordecai stood and moved to the cockpit view screen, and what he saw made his stomach turn. The fortress was a tumor on the face of the world, a massive structure built from green stone that pulsed like diseased flesh. Towers rose from it at odd angles, leaning in directions that should make them fall but somehow did not. The walls were covered in boils that leaked pus, and the gates were ringed with flies so thick they formed black clouds. This was Nurgle's domain, the Plague Father's territory, and everything here was touched by rot and decay. The fortress sat in the center of a valley, and around it stretched gardens of disease. Plants grew here, but they were wrong. Twisted versions of real plants with stems that oozed black liquid and flowers that had mouths full of tiny teeth. Things that might have once been animals wandered through the gardens, their bodies swollen with tumors, their eyes weeping blood and pus. And everywhere, the smell, a stench so powerful it made even the air seem thick and heavy. Mordecai had smelled death before, had walked through plague ships and visited worlds ravaged by biological weapons, but this was worse. This was death that would not end, corruption that fed on itself forever, existence as eternal suffering. The Thunderhawk landed hard on a patch of relatively solid ground 1/2 mile from the fortress. The rear ramp dropped open with a hiss of hydraulics, and immediately the smell rolled in like a physical wave. 2 of the Space Marines gagged inside their helmets, their enhanced biology barely able to cope with the toxicity. One tech priest's filters clogged instantly, and he had to switch to emergency breathing apparatus. But the warrior in green armor simply walked down the ramp as if stepping into a pleasant garden. It stopped at the bottom, surveying the landscape, then started walking toward the fortress. Kratos hurried after it, waving his brothers to form up. Stay close. Watch for ambush. Trust nothing you see here. They moved through the plague gardens in a tight formation, the Space Marines forming a protective circle around Mordecai and the tech priests, with the warrior in green armor taking point. Things watched them from the diseased vegetation, things with too many eyes and mouths in wrong places. Flies landed on their armor by the hundreds, trying to find gaps in the seals where they could burrow into flesh. A stream blocked their path, flowing with liquid that was definitely not water, thick and yellow like pus. The warrior did not hesitate, walking straight through it. The liquid came up to its knees, but when it emerged on the other side, the armor was clean, as if the corruption could not stick to it. They had covered maybe 200 yards when the ground beneath them began to shake. The diseased plants pulled back, creating a clearing, and from that clearing rose something massive. It came up from underground, breaking through the soil like a whale breaching water. A great unclean one, a greater daemon of Nurgle, standing 20 feet tall and twice as wide. Its body was a mountain of rotting flesh, covered in sores that leaked constantly. Its face wore an expression of jovial cruelty, a grandfather's smile on a monster's features. Smaller daemons clung to its body, Nurglings, little creatures that looked like miniature versions of their master, giggling and playing in the folds of diseased flesh. This was Golgoth the Festering, the lord of this fortress, and when it spoke, its voice was wet and bubbling, like someone drowning while trying to talk. "Welcome, welcome, little children. Grandfather Nurgle is so pleased you have come to visit. We have such gifts to share with you, such blessings. You will learn to love the plague, to embrace the decay, to find joy in the eternal cycle of death and rebirth." It raised one massive arm, and from its palm dripped a green liquid that hissed and smoked when it hit the ground. "Come, let me give you Papa Nurgle's kiss." It opened its mouth wide, showing teeth like broken tombstones, and breathed out a cloud of toxic gas so thick it looked like fog. The Space Marines opened fire immediately, their bolters thundering in the corrupted air. Mass reactive rounds exploded against Golgoth's hide, tearing chunks of rotten flesh away, but the daemon only laughed. Where the rounds struck, new boils grew, and from those boils came more Nurglings that dropped to the ground and scuttled toward the kill team. The tech priests fired their plasma weapons, beams of superheated energy burning through the toxic cloud, but Golgoth waded through them like they were warm rain. It swung its massive arm in a backhand that would have killed everyone in its path, but the warrior in green armor was already moving. It ran forward, straight at the greater daemon, and at the last second before the arm connected, it slid under the swing, passing between Golgoth's legs. As it slid, it pulled out the strange blade, the crucible, and the blade blazed with red energy. The warrior slashed upward, cutting through the daemon's leg, and Golgoth screamed. It was not a sound of pain exactly, more like surprise. The leg buckled, and the massive daemon stumbled, going down on one knee. That put its face at the warrior's level, and the warrior did not waste the opportunity. It jumped, impossibly high, reaching Golgoth's face in a single bound, and drove the crucible straight into the daemon's left eye. Golgoth's scream became a roar of genuine pain. It reached up with both hands to grab the warrior, but the warrior was already moving again, pulling the blade free and dropping back to the ground. Green ichor poured from the ruined eye, and where it landed, the ground itself began to rot faster, breaking down into black sludge. The Nurglings that had been advancing on the kill team turned and rushed back to their master, trying to help, but Golgoth swatted them away in its rage. It stood up, favoring its wounded leg, and glared at the warrior with its remaining eye. You are not like the others. You do not fear. You do not despair. What are you?" Iron Father Kratos took advantage of the distraction, leading his brothers in a flanking maneuver. Target the wound. Concentrated fire. The Space Marines aimed at Golgoth's damaged leg and fired in unison, their bolts tearing through weakened flesh. The daemon's leg gave out completely, severed below the knee, and Golgoth crashed to the ground like a falling building. The impact shook the earth, and several of the diseased trees nearby collapsed. But even down, Golgoth was dangerous. It reached out with one arm, fingers splayed wide, and from those fingers shot streams of plague. The streams arced through the air like liquid whips, seeking targets. One stream caught a Space Marine, Brother Maxus, hitting him full in the chest. His armor held for a moment, the blessed ceramite resisting the corruption, but then it began to corrode. Within seconds, rust spread across the armor's surface, eating through seals and joints. Maxus screamed as the plague found his flesh, his enhanced biology fighting a losing battle against Nurgle's gift. He fell to his knees, his body swelling as infection took hold. Kratos saw what was happening and made the hardest decision a commander could make. He raised his bolter and fired once, a mercy shot that ended his brother's suffering before the transformation could complete. "Emperor, forgive me," he whispered, then returned his attention to the battle. The warrior in green armor had not stopped moving. It circled around Golgoth's fallen form, dodging plague streams and swatting aside Nurglings with casual strikes. It pulled out the massive weapon it had used on the Lord of Change, the one that fired green energy, but instead of firing it immediately, the warrior waited. It watched Golgoth struggle to rise, watched the daemon push itself up on its arms, watched it gather power for one final devastating attack. Golgoth's remaining eye began to glow, and its mouth opened wider than should be possible, preparing to vomit a tidal wave of disease that would kill everything within 100 yards. The warrior aimed carefully, taking its time, and just as Golgoth began to release its attack, the warrior fired. The green beam struck Golgoth in the open mouth, traveling straight down the daemon's throat and into its core. For a moment, nothing happened. Golgoth's attack froze, the plague hanging in the air like someone had paused time. Then the daemon's entire body began to glow from within, green light shining through cracks in its rotten flesh. Golgoth tried to scream, but no sound came out. The light grew brighter and brighter, and then the greater daemon exploded. Not a violent explosion of gore, but a silent one where the daemon's body simply came apart into motes of light that drifted upward and vanished. In the space of 3 heartbeats, Golgoth the Festering ceased to exist, banished so completely that even the warp would need centuries to reform its essence. The plague gardens around them began to wither without Golgoth's presence to sustain them. The diseased plants collapsed into dust, the corrupted animals fell and dissolved, even the thick clouds of flies dispersed as if someone had turned off a switch. Within minutes, the landscape looked almost normal, just dead ground and dust, but no longer actively evil. Inquisitor Mordecai stood in shock, his mouth open. He had seen the warrior kill the Lord of Change, but that had been quick, over in a flash. This time he had watched the entire process, had seen how the warrior fought with patience and precision, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "Emperor's mercy," he breathed. "What kind of weapons does your universe possess?" The warrior did not answer, of course. It simply walked toward the fortress, which still stood but now looked less threatening without its master. Kratos rallied his remaining brothers, 4 space marines left from the 6 who had landed, plus the tech priests who had stayed back during the fight. They formed up and followed the warrior. The fortress gates opened as they approached, not pushed by anyone but simply swinging wide as if inviting them in. Mordecai did not trust it. "It is a trap. It must be a trap." But the warrior walked through the gates without hesitation, and after sharing a look with Kratos, Mordecai followed. They had come too far to turn back now. Inside the fortress was worse than outside in some ways. The walls were not stone but compressed flesh, still warm, still pulsing with a slow heartbeat. The floor squelched under their boots, and the air was thick with moisture that made breathing difficult even through helmet filters. They passed through corridors lined with cages where things that had once been human hung from hooks, still alive, their bodies transformed into living gardens of disease. The things called out to them, begging for death or offering secret knowledge if only the kill team would free them. Mordecai forced himself to look away, to focus on the mission. They could not save these poor souls, not anymore. All they could do was complete the mission and hope it was worth the price. The warrior led them deeper into the fortress, navigating the twisted corridors with confidence, as if it could sense where the STC fragment was hidden. They encountered resistance, packs of plague bearers that shambled out of side passages, but the warrior cut through them like a scythe through wheat. It never stopped, never slowed, just killed anything that tried to block their path and kept moving. Kratos found himself grateful for the warrior's presence. Without it, this mission would have failed within the first hour. Even with his enhanced body and armor, he could feel the effects of this place, his muscles growing sluggish, his thoughts turning foggy. The tech priests were worse off, their organic parts rebelling against the toxicity despite their mechanical enhancements. They reached the heart of the fortress, a great hall where the ceiling rose up into darkness beyond sight. In the center of the hall stood a pedestal, and on that pedestal rested a metal box covered in the symbols of the Adeptus Mechanicus. The STC fragment, a piece of ancient human technology from before the Age of Strife, containing blueprints for weapons that could turn the tide against chaos. One of the tech priests rushed forward, his excitement overcoming his caution, but Mordecai grabbed his robe and pulled him back. "Wait." Nothing is ever this easy. As if in response to his words, the walls began to move. What they had thought was decoration was actually thousands of nurglings, packed so tightly they formed a living wallpaper. They peeled away from the walls and ceiling, dropping to the floor in a tide of diseased flesh, all of them giggling and laughing as they advanced. The warrior stepped forward, positioning itself between the kill team and the approaching horde. It pulled out both the shotgun and the energy rifle, holding one in each hand, and began firing. Each shot killed multiple nurglings, but there were so many of them, hundreds, maybe thousands. They kept coming, climbing over the bodies of their fallen brothers, getting closer with every second. The Space Marines added their fire, their bolters creating a wall of exploding shells, but it was not enough. The nurglings reached the warrior, swarming over its legs, climbing up its body, trying to tear at seals and joints. The warrior threw aside its guns and began fighting hand to hand, grabbing nurglings and crushing them, stomping them into paste, moving in a blur of violence. But even the warrior could not fight infinite numbers. It was being overwhelmed, buried under diseased flesh. Kratos made a decision. Get the STC. Now. We did not come here to fail. He and his brothers charged forward, firing as they ran, trying to clear a path. One tech priest broke away and sprinted for the pedestal, his mechanical legs pumping. He reached it, grabbed the metal box, and turned to run back. But something burst from the floor beneath him. A final trap, a daemon that had been waiting. It was not as big as Golgoth, only 10 feet tall, but it moved with horrible speed. It grabbed the tech priest and lifted him off his feet, squeezing. The tech priest's armor crumpled like paper, and his scream cut off as his body was crushed. But as he died, he threw the metal box toward Kratos with the last of his strength. Kratos caught it, tucking it against his chest with his normal arm, while his power fist punched through nurglings that tried to stop him. Retreat, back to the entrance. The kill team fell back in good order, the Space Marines covering each other while Mordecai used his psychic powers to create barriers of force that held back the tide for precious seconds. But the warrior was still buried, still fighting under a pile of daemons. Kratos stopped at the hall's entrance, torn. They had the STC, the mission was complete, but could he leave the warrior behind? Before he could decide, the pile of nurglings exploded outward. The warrior burst free, covered in daemon blood and ichor, its armor dented but intact. It had pulled out the crucible again, and the blade was singing, literally singing, a high note that hurt to hear. The warrior spun in a circle, the blade extended, and everything within 10 feet was cut in half. The daemon that had killed the tech priest lunged at the warrior, but the warrior was ready. It drove the crucible up through the daemon's jaw and into its brain, if daemons had brains. The creature froze, impaled on the blade, and then it dissolved into nothing. The warrior pulled the blade free, deactivated it, and ran for the entrance. The nurglings gave chase, but without their masters to direct them, they were just mindless hunger. The warrior reached Kratos, grabbed his shoulder to make sure he still had the STC, then pushed him toward the exit. They ran through the corridors, the fortress collapsing around them now that Golgoth was truly gone. Chunks of flesh wall fell from above, the floor cracked and broke, and behind them they could hear the screams of the caged victims being buried as the structure came down. They burst out of the gates just as the fortress began to implode, falling in on itself like a rotten fruit. The Thunderhawk was already there, hovering with its ramp down, the pilot having brought it closer when he saw them emerge. The kill team sprinted across the dead ground, jumped aboard, and the pilot pulled up hard, gaining altitude fast. Behind them, the fortress finished collapsing, leaving nothing but a crater filled with dust. The daemon world began to fade, losing cohesion without Golgoth's power to anchor it to reality. They had won, but the cost had been high. 2 Space Marines dead, 1 tech priest dead, and Kratos himself could feel something wrong inside, some sickness that would need treatment once they reached real space. The warrior sat down heavily, its armor scored and dented in a dozen places. It reached up and touched its chest where a nurgling had managed to pierce through, finding a small hole that leaked a drop of blood. Human blood, red and normal. Mordecai knelt beside it, pulling out a medical kit. "Let me see that wound." The warrior did not resist, letting him clean and seal the small puncture. As he worked, he spoke quietly, for the warrior's ears only. "You saved us. Without you, we would all be dead, or worse. I owe you my life, and I pay my debts. When we return to Imperial space, I will speak for you to the highest authorities. I will tell them what I have seen, what you are capable of. You have earned your place among us." The warrior looked at him with that emotionless helmet, but somehow he felt it understood. It reached out and gently touched his shoulder, just for a moment, a gesture that might have been gratitude. Then it turned away and stared out the window as they climbed toward the stars, leaving hell behind, at least for now. The battle barge Iron Will emerged from the warp 12 days after their escape from the Daemon world. The transition back to real space was rough, the ship shuddering as it tore through the barrier between dimensions, but they made it. They were alive, and they had the STC fragment. Iron Father Kratos sat in the Medicae bay, stripped to the waist, while servitors worked on him with surgical tools. The plague he had contracted in the fortress had spread through his remaining organic parts, requiring extensive cleansing and in some cases replacement with more cybernetics. He welcomed it. The flesh was weak, as his chapter always said, but the machine was strong. Each piece of humanity he lost brought him closer to the machine god's perfection. Inquisitor Mordecai stood at the viewport in his personal quarters, staring out at the stars. Real stars, not the twisted mockeries that filled the Eye of Terror. He had scrubbed himself for 2 hours after they returned, using blessed water and sacred oils to cleanse any taint that might have clung to his skin. His bionic eye had needed complete recalibration, the sensors damaged by exposure to so much warp energy, but he was alive, and more importantly, he had witnessed something that would change the Imperium forever. The question now was what to do about it. The warrior in green armor had been given quarters near the ship's armory. It had not asked for them, had simply followed when led there, and had spent the past 12 days in silence. The ship's tech priests had offered to repair its armor, but the warrior had refused, or at least had gently pushed their hands away whenever they tried to approach. Instead, it repaired the armor itself, using tools from its own supplies, working with a precision that made the tech priests jealous. They watched from a distance, taking notes, trying to understand the technology. The armor's self-repair systems were unlike anything in Imperial databases, using some form of nano-reconstruction that seemed almost alive. The STC fragment had been delivered to Mars immediately, transmitted through the most secure channels the Imperium possessed. Within hours, responses came back from the Fabricator General himself. The fragment contained blueprints for weapons specifically designed to fight daemons, technology from the dark age of technology when humanity had been at its peak. Plasma weapons that could disrupt warp energy, blades that cut through demonic essence like it was paper, armor that resisted corruption at a molecular level. This was beyond valuable. This was priceless. The Mechanicus estimated it would take decades to fully understand and implement the technology, but once they did, it would save millions of lives across thousands of worlds. News of the successful mission spread through the ship first, then to the wider fleet, then beyond. Stories grew in the telling, as stories always did. The tale of the silent warrior who walked through hell without fear became legend within days. Some said it was an ancient weapon from the Dark Age, awakened by the Emperor's will. Others claimed it was a living saint in disguise, sent to help humanity in its darkest hour. A few whispered it might be one of the lost Primarchs, the two who had been erased from history, returned to fight once more. None of these stories were quite right, but all of them carried a grain of truth. On the 13th day after their return, Mordecai received a message that made his hands shake. It came directly from Terra, from the High Lords themselves, encrypted with codes that only a handful of people in the galaxy knew. The message was brief. Bring the warrior called Damonsbane to Terra immediately. The High Lords will convene to decide its fate. The Emperor's light guide you. He read it 3 times, hardly believing what he was seeing. The High Lords themselves wanted to meet the warrior. This was unprecedented. He went to find Kratos immediately. The Iron Father was back on his feet, half his torso now gleaming silver metal. He listened to Mordecai's news without expression, though he could see the tension in Kratos' remaining organic eye. Terra, he said slowly. They will either embrace him as the weapon we need, or they will destroy him as too dangerous to live. There will be no middle ground. Mordecai nodded. That is why I need your help. I must present the warrior in the best possible light. The High Lords must understand what he is, what he represents. Will you speak for him? Kratos was quiet for a long moment, his mechanical parts whirring softly. I am a soldier, inquisitor, not a politician, but I will tell the truth of what I saw. That will have to be enough. They found the warrior in the training halls, running through combat drills against servitors. The servitors were not real opponents, just mechanical targets, but the warrior fought them as seriously as if they were actual enemies. It moved through forms and techniques, practicing with each of its weapons in turn, never satisfied, always seeking to improve. When Mordecai approached, the warrior stopped immediately and turned to face him. He explained about the summons to Terra, about the High Lord's command, about what it might mean. The warrior listened without moving, and when he finished, it simply nodded. It would go. Of course it would go. It always went where the fight was. The journey to Holy Terra took 3 weeks through the warp, traveling on the fastest ship the Inquisition could provide. During that time, Mordecai worked tirelessly to prepare his presentation. He compiled all the data from their mission, all the recordings from his servo skull, all the testimony from the surviving space marines and tech priests. He reviewed it over and over, searching for the perfect words that would convince the High Lords. The warrior's actions spoke for themselves, but he needed to provide context to make them understand what they were dealing with. The warrior spent the journey much as it had spent the time on the Iron Will, training and maintaining its equipment, but Mordecai noticed something new. Sometimes he would find the warrior standing at a viewport, staring out at the stars, its helmet angled slightly as if listening to something only it could hear. Once, he approached during one of these moments and asked what it was thinking about. The warrior turned to look at him, and though he could not see its face, he felt somehow that it was remembering. Remembering what, he could not say. Perhaps its own world, its own battles, its own lost companions. Everyone who fought for long enough accumulated ghosts. They arrived at Terra on the 53rd day since the warrior had first appeared on Metallicus Prime. The sight of humanity's birth world still took Mordecai's breath away, even after seeing it dozens of times. The planet was covered in cities, billions upon billions of people living in structures that stretched miles into the sky and deep into the earth. At the North Pole stood the Imperial Palace, a fortress city larger than some continents, its walls rising hundreds of stories high, its towers piercing the clouds. And at the very heart of that palace, buried under layers of armor and protection, sat the Golden Throne, where the God Emperor of mankind had sat for 10,000 years, holding back the darkness through sheer force of will. Their ship landed at one of the palace's many spaceports, and they were met by an honor guard of Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's personal guardians. These were warriors that made space marines look almost normal, standing over 9 feet tall in golden armor that gleamed like sunlight. Their leader, a captain whose name was Valdor, looked at the warrior in green armor with eyes that had witnessed 10 millennia of history. So this is the one who has caused such discussion among the High Lords. It does not look like much. Mordecai bristled at the comment. But before he could respond, the warrior stepped forward. It stood before Valdor, shorter by more than a foot, outmatched in every physical dimension, and yet it did not seem small. The two warriors regarded each other in silence, and something passed between them, some recognition that only those who had fought forever could understand. Valdor nodded slowly. Perhaps I spoke too quickly. Come, the High Lords are waiting, and they do not like to be kept waiting. They walked through corridors of marble and gold, past statues of heroes and saints, under ceilings painted with scenes of the Great Crusade. Mordecai felt the weight of history pressing down on him. 10,000 years of struggle, of sacrifice, of humanity fighting for survival against impossible odds. And now, they were going to present something that might change everything. They reached a massive door carved from a single piece of black stone, and that door opened silently, revealing the chamber of the High Lords. The chamber was circular, with 12 thrones arranged around the edge, and in the center a space where those being judged would stand. 11 of the 12 thrones were occupied. There sat the Master of the Administratum, the Ecclesiarch of the Imperial Church, the Fabricator General of Mars appearing via hologram, the Grand Master of the Officio Assassinorum, the Lord Commander Militant of the Imperial Guard, and 6 others, each representing a different branch of imperial power. The 12th throne, the largest and most ornate, sat empty. That throne belonged to the Emperor himself, or would have if he could leave the Golden Throne. Its emptiness was a reminder that the Emperor watched everything, even if he could not speak. The Master of the Administratum, an ancient man whose body was more life-support machinery than flesh, spoke first. His voice was amplified by voxcasters, booming through the chamber. Inquisitor Mordecai, You stand before the High Lords of Terra to present evidence regarding an unknown entity that has appeared within Imperial space. You claim this entity has performed extraordinary service in the war against chaos. You claim it deserves recognition and sanction. Speak, and let your words be true, for the Emperor judges all lies. Mordecai stepped forward, his heart pounding, but his voice steady. He had faced greater daemons and walked through the eye of terror. He would not falter now. High Lords, I present to you the one we have named Daemon's Bane. It appeared without warning during a demonic incursion on Metallicus Prime and single-handedly turned the tide of battle. Since then, it has fought alongside the forces of the Imperium, demonstrating abilities that exceed anything we possess. He activated his data slate, projecting holographic images into the center of the chamber. It killed a greater daemon of Tzinch aboard the battle barge Iron Will with a single shot. It destroyed Golgoth the Festering, a greater daemon of Nurgle, in personal combat. It retrieved an STC fragment from the heart of a daemon world, technology that will save countless lives. The ecclesiarch leaned forward, his robes rustling. He was a fat man with cruel eyes, and his voice dripped with suspicion. And yet this creature will not speak, will not identify itself, will not kneel before the Emperor's authority. How do we know it is not a trick of chaos? The ruinous powers are cunning beyond measure. Perhaps this is a long game, building trust before the betrayal. Mordecai had expected this. I have personally examined its mind with my psychic abilities. There is no taint of chaos within it. The very thought of corruption is alien to its nature. It fights daemons not for glory or duty, but because that is what it was made to do. The Fabricator General's hologram flickered as it spoke, its voice mechanical and distorted. The technology this entity possesses is beyond our current understanding. The armor shows signs of molecular reconstruction. The weapons use power sources we cannot identify. If we could study it, dissect it, we might learn secrets that would advance the Omnissiah's knowledge by centuries. The Grand Master of the Assassinorum spoke then, a man whose face was hidden behind a skull mask. Or we could simply eliminate it. Unknown variables are dangerous variables. Better to remove the threat before it becomes one. The argument went back and forth, voices rising, tempers flaring. Some High Lords saw opportunity, others saw danger, and none could agree. Through it all, the warrior stood silent in the center of the chamber, patient as stone, waiting for judgment. Mordecai felt desperation growing in his chest. They were going to reject him. They were going to order his destruction out of fear and ignorance. He opened his mouth to speak again, to make one final plea, when something happened that had not happened in 10,000 years. The air in the chamber changed. It became warm, and a light began to grow. A golden light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The High Lords fell silent, shock on their faces. Mordecai felt his knees go weak, and he had to fight not to collapse. He knew this feeling, had felt it once before, when he had been granted a vision during his trials to become an Inquisitor. This was the Emperor's presence, his consciousness reaching out from the golden throne where his body sat dying but his mind remained strong. The light coalesced above the warrior's head, forming into a shape that might have been a man or might have been something greater. A voice spoke, not with sound but directly into the minds of everyone present. It was the Emperor's voice, and it carried weight that could break mountains. This one is mine. It comes from beyond, from a place where another version of hell was fought and conquered. It is a warrior forged in eternal battle, tested beyond anything this universe has produced, and found pure. It will serve humanity as I serve humanity, asking nothing, giving everything. Do not fear what you do not understand. Embrace the weapon I have brought to you in your darkest hour. The presence faded, the light dimming, and everyone in the chamber took shaky breaths. Mordecai wiped tears from his face, tears he had not realized he was crying. The High Lords looked at each other, and no one spoke for a long moment. Finally, the Master of the Administratum cleared his throat. The Emperor has spoken. We have our answer. He turned to address the warrior directly. You are hereby granted the title of Daemon's Bane, Champion of Terra, with full authority to hunt the enemies of mankind wherever they may hide. You will be given a ship, the Eternal Vigil, and you may choose your crew from any who volunteer to serve with you. You will answer to the High Lords in matters of strategy, but in combat, you have complete autonomy. Do you accept this charge? The warrior stood silent for 3 heartbeats, and then it did something it had never done before. It knelt, one knee touching the floor, its helmeted head bowing. It placed its right fist over its heart, a gesture that transcended language. Yes, it accepted. The High Lords looked satisfied, or at least less hostile. The session was declared ended, and Mordecai was dismissed with instructions to help the warrior prepare for its new role. He walked out of the chamber in a daze, hardly believing what had just happened. The Emperor himself had intervened. That meant something. Something important, though he was not sure what. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. The Eternal Vigil was prepared, a strike cruiser configured for rapid deployment and daemon hunting. Word spread through the Imperium that the High Lords were seeking volunteers for a special mission, one that would face the worst horrors chaos could produce. Mordecai expected few to answer the call. He was wrong. They came by the hundreds, by the thousands. Space Marines from a dozen different chapters, each one bearing scars from fighting demons. Imperial Guard veterans who had survived demon worlds and wanted revenge. Tech priests obsessed with anti-demon technology. Inquisitors who specialized in demonic lore. Even a few Sisters of Battle. Holy warriors who served the Emperor with absolute faith. The warrior walked among them, silent as always, but somehow selecting those who would serve. It did not choose the strongest or the most skilled. It chose those whose eyes showed they understood what eternal war truly meant. Those who had lost everything to chaos and had nothing left but the fight. Those who would never stop, never surrender, never falter. By the time the selection was complete, the Eternal Vigil had a crew of 500 souls, each one ready to die in humanity's service. Their first mission came quickly. A Daemon Prince of Slaanesh had taken control of 3 worlds in the Segmentum Obscurus, corrupting their populations and turning them into pleasure cults. The local Imperial forces were overwhelmed, falling one by one to excess and temptation. The Eternal Vigil arrived in system like a knife in the dark. The warrior led boarding parties onto corrupted ships, cutting through daemonettes and cultists with cold efficiency. It stormed corrupted palaces where nobles had given themselves over to dark pleasures, showing no mercy to those who had abandoned their humanity. The Daemon Prince itself fell to the Crucible's blade, banished back to the warp screaming curses that faded into nothing. The news of the victory spread. Then came another mission, and another. A Keeper of Secrets manifesting in a hive city, a demonic incursion on an Adeptus Mechanicus research station. A cult of Khorne threatening to open a warp rift in the middle of a cardinal world. Each time the Eternal Vigil responded, and each time the warrior led from the front, killing with the same relentless determination. Survivors told stories of a figure in green armor that never stopped, never tired, never showed fear. The daemons began to fear it too. In the warp, whispers spread of the Slayer, a name that made even greater daemons pause. Something was hunting them now, something that could not be corrupted or stopped or reasoned with. For the first time in 10,000 years, the daemons knew what it felt like to be prey. Inquisitor Mordecai watched the warrior's legend grow from the bridge of the Eternal Vigil. He had become its unofficial second-in-command, translating its silent commands, managing the crew, handling the politics so the warrior could focus on what it did best. He thought about what the Emperor had said, about this being a weapon brought to humanity in its darkest hour. He believed it now. The galaxy was burning, chaos was winning on 1,000 fronts, and humanity stood on the edge of extinction. But now they had something new, something the enemy had never faced before. They had hope, delivered in the form of a silent warrior who would never stop fighting. One night, as the ship traveled through the warp toward their next mission, Mordecai found the warrior standing at a viewport again, staring at the madness outside. He stood beside it in comfortable silence, 2 warriors who had fought through hell together. "Do you ever rest?" he asked quietly. The warrior turned its head to look at him, and he thought he saw something in that featureless helmet, some echo of weariness that went deeper than any human could understand. Then it reached out and gently touched his shoulder, the same gesture it had made in the Thunderhawk. It was saying, he realized, that rest would come eventually, when the work was done. When every daemon in the warp had been hunted down and destroyed, when humanity was safe, not before. The warrior turned back to the viewport, and Mordecai smiled despite the sadness he felt. "Then we will fight together until the end. For the Emperor, for humanity, for everyone who cannot fight for themselves." The warrior raised one fist acknowledging his words. And outside the ship, the warp screamed as they plunged forward into darkness, toward the next battle, toward the endless war. But now, for the first time in 10,000 years, Humanity was not fighting alone. The Daemon's Bane had arrived, and hell itself would learn to fear his name.